Feeling good, buddy? You look psyched, hell. You look so good, I wish I was you. It's gonna be a fun day.
What is wrong with you?
If you're into gaming in the 90s, well, then chances are you heard the phrase Doom clone, which was the term given to pretty much any first-person shooter at the time that wasn't Doom. Then in the early to mid-2000s, there was another one introduced with the term Halo Killers, which more often than not just referred to when Sony brought out a game that they claimed would knock Halo off its perch, where in almost every single case, it did not. Either way though, seeing as we just got the announcement and reveal of a new Halo remake in the works, I thought it'd be fun to go back and take a look at some more memorable Halo killers. Starting way back in 2004 with one of the earliest examples in Guerrilla Games' Killzone for the PlayStation 2. Now, as someone who was both super into the PS2 at the time, not to mention first-person shooters, this is something I was genuinely hyped up for. And I still remember seeing all those early screenshots they showed off and thinking it was just the best looking game ever made. Not to mention, it had one of the most badass commercials of all time. However, then I played it. Story-wise, it takes place in the 24th century after humanity has begun colonizing other planets, and the inhabitants of the planet Helgen, aptly named the Helghast, have now risen up and attacked the ISA, with the ISA kind of being like the United Nations in space, also responsible for banishing the people of Helgen there in the first place.
Shit! Okay. Any ideas?
Because it turns out these guys were originally sent to the planet in exile, but due to the harsh conditions, they actually evolved and became a lot tougher and more resilient than normal humans. And they're now led by their emperor, Skull of Asari, with the goal being to expand the empire by launching this massive surprise attack on the ISA's home planet of Vector. You're playing as one of these ISA soldiers, a guy named Captain Templar, leading a squad behind enemy lines to uncover the reasons behind the attack.
How do you know this shit?
Which ends up going a whole lot deeper than just a random operation carried out by the Helgen military.
Oh, Jesus.
And things start off pretty well too. You got a really awesome opening cinematic with Vasari giving this whole dictator-style speech to legions of Helgen soldiers, showing him as this charismatic and motivational guy. Just the kind of person you'd believe could rally an entire civilization into going to war.
Defenders of the Helghast dream, now is our time!
And then that little wicked smirk towards the camera at the end there leaves no doubts to his true intentions. After that, you hit the main menu and you get the incredibly awesome theme tune, which is hands down some of the best video game music ever created. But then you actually start playing the game where you're presented with this riveting opening sequence that looks like this.
More of them in the distance!
Showcasing the very running theme the visuals have got going on here, where it's either a brown or grey colour palette, with it all seeming very monochromatic and flat, topped off with an insane amount of grain and image noise.
It's this way.
And the way that the screen looks when you've activated thermal vision is what it'd look like if the Predator gave someone a colonoscopy. Doesn't really matter where you are either, be it trenches, forests or swamps, it's all just so murky and dull, really lacking any kind of clarity. I do think some of the areas inside the shopping malls look okay though, along with a bit later on where you're moving through these mangroves. But this was a far cry from the way it got presented in pre-release screenshots. And compare it to something like Time Splitters 2, which came out a couple of years prior but just looks leaps and bounds better. Not to mention even more recent titles like Metal Gear Solid 3, 007 Nightfire, or yeah, Halo on the Xbox, all of which just runs rings around it. Now, there was a HD version that came out a few years later for the PlayStation 3, which, yeah, does make the whole thing look a lot better, but then even that doesn't fix the other underlying problem, which is the controls. Oh yeah, man, the controls. I mean, this honestly might be some of the clunkiest FPS controls of all time. For starters, you've got way too much aiming acceleration, which makes moving about kind of finicky. And it never seems like you can move the crosshair in small increments either, because it has this tendency to just suddenly jump large amounts at once. The other thing that instantly put me off about Killzone's controls was the way that it tries to make everything feel more immersive and realistic. Like they wanted to make it how every action seems like it had its own weight, and that you're attached to an actual human torso as opposed to just being a pair of floating arms. So this means that every time you reload, for instance, the screen sways all over the place to simulate your character's eye line moving around. which honestly though, just after a while makes me feel sick. Makes me sick! But then it also messes with your aiming because it moves the screen around. And it's like they tried to simulate inertia and body movement, but instead just found a way to simulate motion sickness. Even something as simple as throwing a grenade has to be this long drawn out animation. And don't even get me started on climbing ladders or the melee takedowns.
What a thrill.
More than that though, the combat just isn't very good either. Mostly because of how inaccurate all the weapons feel, and even when you're zoomed in, it's like your shots barely actually hit what you're aiming at. It's not helping either that the Helghan are incredibly spongy, and I lost count the amount of times here that I started shooting at one and then stopped because I thought that they were dead, only for them to just get back up again and keep attacking.
That's messy, man.
And then on the other hand, whenever these guys shoot at you, you seem to die in seconds, even on the normal difficulty. The frame rate isn't really doing you any favors either, with it being very choppy at times, which is a handicap the enemy AI of course doesn't get affected by. And it just feels like they tried to make a semi-tactical shooter, where you've got to hang back and pick enemies off from a distance. However, that's a rule that doesn't actually apply to the enemies. Killzone also might have one of the worst health mechanics I've ever experienced.
Oh shit.
So basically they had the option here to go for regenerating health, which was starting to become pretty standard by that point, or instead use a fixed health system. But what they ended up doing was a worse off combination of both, giving you a fixed health bar and medkits to top you up, but then also a regenerating system which refills a portion. The only thing is that this refills incredibly slowly, and if you've taken a lot of damage, it only fills up a small amount, around like 25% of your total, which means you can spend entire segments running around with only a quarter of your health bar, because the game rarely actually drops medkits.
Come on now, dawg.
Plus, it's one of those old games where they thought it was a good idea to give you bugger all checkpoints. In fact, you're lucky if you get one for an entire level, with some of these going on for a good 15 or 20 minutes. And once you start encountering enemies with grenade launchers, who yeah, of course can fire those things with pinpoint accuracy, you'll see how much of an annoyance this actually is.
Shit, they got Hacker.
After playing for a couple of hours, you do start unlocking the option to play as other characters, so then aside from Templar, you can choose from Luger, Rico, and then Hacker, who's a half Helghan, half ISA intelligence officer.
Perhaps we could improve those odds by creating something of a stir right here.
With the idea being that they've all got different playstyles. For instance, Luger's supposed to be some kind of spy character who can sneak around. Only stealth seems to be kind of pointless. And most of the time the other characters initiate combat outside of your control.
Good cover up here. With any luck, they'll roll right past and not spot us.
There are certain missions where you can hide in the bushes or stay out of sight and maybe get by without being detected. But these moments are pretty rare, and it's just as easy to ambush everyone and kill them anyway.
We'll take cover while you check out the area.
A few moments later.
So the main thing that differs between them is their unique weapon, with Luger having what's hands down I think one of the best guns in the game with her silent submachine gun, only because it fires like a laser pointer. And then Rico has what's arguably the second best weapon with his machine gun, which has 800 or so maximum rounds and never has to be reloaded. There's a few times when you get to go ham with this thing in interior areas and you really feel like a T-800, slowly walking around and just mowing down soldiers with ease. Templar, on the other hand, starts out with his ISA assault rifle, which is also really good. However, they barely ever give you any ammo for this thing. So you'll likely most have to swap out to one of the Helghan weapons, which is where Hacker comes in handy, given that his perk is when using Helghan guns, his accuracy is greatly improved. Other than that though, there's not really that many differences between them in the campaign, and yeah, certainly not enough worth replaying entire missions to experiment.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Having said that though, like, there are some cool ideas here. I mean, I think the Helghan rifle having an alt fire that's a shotgun is pretty damn brutal and kind of awesome. And that little revolver grenade launcher thing you get is really fun too. But so much of this game is just utterly forgettable, and the writing and dialogue is often laughable. I mean, they got this whole subplot between Luger and Templar about how they used to date or something, which just feels weird and out of place.
No, I mean, did you make any new friends?
Are you asking me if I got laid?
And then this whole dynamic between Rico and Hacker, with Rico not trusting the guy after he lost his entire squad to a Helgen ambush.
It's lucky for you that you hold some vital shit in your head, you bald fuck.
Though I will say that at least Rico is a lot more likable here compared to the sequels, you know, where he turned into a fucking imbecile that was more or less single-handedly responsible for all of the bad stuff that happened. I just think that overall, Killzone is fundamentally not a very good shooter. It's really just going from one dull environment to the next, shooting the same look and few enemies over and over. There's not really any set pieces or even memorable sequences to really speak of. And when again compared to the kind of thing that Halo was pulling off at the time, it comes across as even more boring.
God, right like a son of a...
In fact, I remember that the response to this game was so lukewarm when it came out that even the gaming magazine I used to read back then, it took them 3 months to actually get around to covering it. Though in the game's defense, it probably didn't help either that it came out the same month as Half-Life 2 and San Andreas. But even if it didn't, I can't really imagine it would have knocked people's socks off. So yeah, like a Halo killer, this was not.
You bald fuck.
Killzone 2 came out years later in 2009 for the PS3, and to be fair, it does seem like they learned from a lot of their mistakes. For starters, the controls were vastly improved, feeling far more responsive, plus they included a more standard regenerating health system, which massively improved the pacing of the game, allowing you to move through levels a lot quicker and not have to spend time hiding behind a rock waiting for your health bar to refill. Visually too, it remains one of the best looking games ever made for the platform and is still really impressive with some of its set pieces. Yes, it has actual set pieces. In fact, I still reckon some of these areas in the game stack up and look incredible. But it does again have an utterly stupid story, and the ending is infuriatingly dumb, with Rico basically screwing everyone over and signing their death warrants. But compared to their efforts in Killzone 1, the second game definitely knocks it out of the park. And it was a pretty big reason as to why the PS3 sold so many copies. In fact, I'm not ashamed to admit that I also got sucked into the hype here, even after we'd all found out that the so-called in-game engine trailer they released was complete bollocks.
Fuck you!
But before we keep going too far forward, let's go back again to 2006 with Resistance Fallen Man, developed by Insomniac Games. The same team who worked on the awesome Ratchet & Clank series, with this being their first foray into the FPS genre. And this really does have one of the most unique premises and settings, taking place in an alternate history where the Second World War never happened, because instead the Earth got invaded by a parasitic alien species called the Chimera, which then swept across Europe, decimating the population and converting humans into their own through a nasty parasitic virus.
Hey, I've seen this one.
Anyway, you're playing as an edgelord named Sergeant Hale, a US Army Ranger with a shaved head and the same vocabulary as Gordon Freeman, fighting back against the Chimera in the UK. Early on in the game, you're infected with the virus. However, instead of it outright killing you, it instead gives you increased strength and healing factor, with all of the game's events being recounted by a woman named Rachel Parker, who's documenting Hale's activities and his slow descent into becoming fully infected.
I'll be in touch. Frequency 77.6.
Early on here too, things do start off pretty damn well, and visually, Resistance looks amazing for a PS3 game, especially for a launch title, and the scale of some of these earlier chapters is really impressive. And you got a really cool level here where you get to control a tank, which is just awesome, and across the board the controls are smooth and responsive. The weapons are pretty fun too, like this fully automatic version of an old carbine rifle that also happens to have a grenade launcher attachment. Plus the Chimeran weapons are really creative as well, like the Bullseye, which fires out a dart that tags enemies, where then every shot fired after that is going to automatically home in on that target. Which is good, because otherwise this thing is about as accurate as trying to piss into a shot glass through a colander. You got the auger rifle too, which fires through solid walls and has an alternate fire energy shield which will absolutely save your bacon. As well as the sapper, which fires out these beach ball sized globs of acid that explode when enemies get too close. About the only thing they bungled here is the shotgun, which just feels really weak and has the most piss-poor sound effect of all time. But just in terms of it being a shooter, it's mechanically pretty solid. The issue is that it eventually falls into the same traps that Killzone did, namely just that the Chimera, much like the Hellghast, are super spongy and often tedious to kill. And after a while, it just seems like the campaign runs out of ideas to keep things interesting. It's got a weird health system as well, which is again a combination of fixed and regenerating. This time it's broken down into 4 segments, and if you don't lose an entire segment and can avoid taking damage, you'll regenerate that chunk, with medkits being the only way to fill up the empty ones. However, the problem is that you take damage so quickly that more often than not, you'll always be down to a single health bar. And again, because the pickups are so sporadic, you can go long sections on essentially 25% health. I remember how Half-Life 2 had this really neat RNG system where the lower your health was, the higher chance there was for the Combine enemies to drop these small incremental health packs. Which meant that if you took too much damage and were a fair ways away from the next fixed health pickup, well, the game would give you a bit of a leg up to make things seem a bit less crushing. Here though, you're just entirely at the mercy of wherever the developers put these things, and that can often be few and far between. It's also a super stingy game when it comes to grenades and ammo for the better guns. And this really sucks, man, because the grenades are super effective here, like the Hedgehog grenade, which launches out these spikes in every direction, not only being creative, but also really handy. Plus, Resistance has lots of moments in its campaign where it really feels like you're becoming the victim to these lame traps and other areas designed to ambush the player. The kind of thing you don't really know is coming and are probably gonna die to.
That was great!
Not to mention it has an absolute abundance of these little spider things which come at you in absolute droves, and really feel like blatant ways to pad out the length of some of these chapters. Along with these super spongy tank enemies that soak up literally dozens of bullets.
Now, what the hell is this?
Now keep in mind that this is yet again another game where they give you bugger all checkpoints. And you'll often play for like 5 or 10 minutes, wipe out a whole bunch of enemies and maybe even a mini-boss, without so much as a single one in between. Which is honestly just kinda lame and really reminds me how much I hate how older games used to pull this thing.
What is this with everybody? What is it? Really? Why? I'm serious.
There are some pretty fun levels though. I mean, I think the best example is one where you've got to clear out like 6 different towers to open up a bunch of gates, which really feels like a poor man's Highway 17. And you probably get to kill more Chimera in this level alone than you do the rest of the game. In fact, speaking of Half-Life 2, that's the game that I think this feels like the most to me. Even the whole premise is very similar, with the Chimera coming to Earth being reminiscent of the Combine taking over as well, in the way that it's this very technologically advanced species that's able to also integrate their own biology into humans. Some of the levels set inside Chimeran structures feel very similar to the Combine environments as well, and you've even got these emaciated enemies that are not fully formed yet, which resemble the Stalkers from Half-Life 2. But to be honest, like, comparing this thing to Half-Life 2 is like comparing a finger painting to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And while Resistance isn't a bad game, I do think it is pretty lackluster. And its positive response probably just stems from it being a launch title, and the fact that we really had nothing else to compare it to at the time. I mean, yeah, like we might have had Call of Duty 3, but as far as FPS launch games go for the platform, like, that was it. This wasn't the last we saw of the series either, because Insomniac also made Resistance 2 and then a few years later on, Resistance 3. And again, just like Killzone 2, it does seem like they tried to improve upon what they started.
You wanna fly this thing? Be my guest!
For instance, this time, Hale now actually talks, automatically making him a far more interesting protagonist.
Negative, Victor 1, push through!
Even if he still does act like a total edgelord with his shaved head and stoic attitude.
If any of you want to leave, get out now.
It takes place after the events in the first game, with Hale now working for a special forces group comprised of other soldiers all infected by the virus. Moving through environments like San Francisco and Idaho as you track down a powerful new Chimeran entity named Daedalus, which looks like what had happened if you ever grafted someone's face onto a pair of testicles.
They are calling to us. Can you hear them?
The whole thing feels and controls a whole lot better, with a new sprint mechanic and a slight snap to target when you aim down the sights, making the shooting feel vastly improved. There's also a whole lot more checkpoints here now as well, which reduces the amount of time you spend replaying sections, which is a good thing. Plus, they've just included a standard regenerating health system. No chunks or segments or any of that shit, just something you can now get all back after avoiding damage for a few seconds. Which also makes sense from a lore perspective, given how advanced the virus is in Hale's body at this point, reflecting his heightened healing factor. Some of the new weapons are really awesome too, like this revolver which fires out rounds that can be manually detonated. You got the marksman rifle which is really accurate and does high damage, along with firing out this little electrical orb as its alternate fire which zaps all nearby enemies. The auger makes a return too and now highlights hostiles through walls, which makes it even more effective. And then the bullseye's alt fire also highlights targets as well, so now you actually know when you've hit something. Plus I also like the updated air fuel grenade, which you now have to shoot at to ignite, again doing massive damage. But this really is a bit of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of deal, because for every couple of things this sequel improves, it also seems to take something away. I mean, visually, for instance, I would say the game looks better than the first one, but then in some areas it's also really dark to the point of it being a bit of a hindrance. Other times the visuals can also obscure your vision, like this level here opening up in the middle of a goddamn smoke storm where I'm being shot at by enemies that I can't even see. Because yeah, that's fun. Though I do want to praise the water physics, which look amazing.
Dear God, it's beautiful.
Despite all the weapons and the shooting feeling a lot better, for some reason they decided to add in a 2-weapon limit, which severely handicaps how much fun you can have here, as you now need to constantly swap weapons in and out. And again, the game is still full of these super annoying enemies. Like these new drone things that fly around and explode when they get too close, which are even more tedious than those goddamn spiders were. Oh yeah, but don't worry, because the spiders are back as well, which seem to pop up just around when you get to that point when you forget they exist. Those big tank guys are back as well, which again are just annoying to fight and can still kill you in a single hit. And there's even one point when you need to take on 3 at once, which is just horse shit.
Holy shit!
But by far the worst here are the chameleons, which are these invisible enemies that come out of nowhere to attack you, and again can kill you in a single hit. Early on when you're in the jungle, they're really easy to spot, as that cloaking effect sticks out like a dog's balls. But from then on in, it becomes a lot trickier, and you instead need to listen out for this very distinct audio cue. Even then though, you're still probably going to die to them a whole lot, and the fact that they keep popping up randomly throughout the rest of the campaign means you're just constantly on edge waiting for these assholes to show up. If you don't have the right weapon for it as well, then yeah, you're also kinda screwed. Like, yeah, I love how it says to me that a shotgun is the best way to deal with them, at a point in the game when it doesn't even give me a fucking shotgun. Overall though, I would say that Resistance 2 is by far the superior game to play. Apparently it also sold pretty well, even if that was less than the first game. But still a fair ways away from even coming close to the kind of numbers that Halo was pulling in. So again, is it a Halo killer? Well, no, not really. Which brings me on to the next game in the list with Crysis, one of the few Halo killers we had for the PC. Developed by German devs Crytek, this game is still legendary, if only for the insane hardware requirements it had to actually get it running on the highest graphical settings. In fact, I still remember that every time I got a new PC build or bought a new GPU, that the first thing I'd always do is load up Crysis to see if it could handle it on Ultra. Usually playing as far as that first sunrise to see how it performed, where most of the time it wasn't all that great. And in fact, even now, playing this in 2025 with my 5090, there was a couple of times there throughout the campaign where the frame rate dipped and started chugging along. I'd argue too that by today's standards, the whole thing still looks pretty damn good, with some highly realistic looking jungles and environments, and a believable amount of foliage really capturing the feeling of being on this remote tropical island. There's also great effects in there too, with all the various physics when destroying structures like shacks and guard towers. And some of those later areas still look absolutely stunning. Now, story-wise, Crysis is another one of those games with a great premise. You're playing as a dude named Nomad, part of the elite Raptor team, comprised of dudes all wearing these high-tech nanosuits, which give them all superhuman strength, speed, armor, and a cloak.
Cloak engaged.
All of which become a pretty main focus to the gameplay, with the player able to swap back and forth between these modes on the fly. In the group, you've got Psycho, Aztec, and Jester, who both get killed very early on. And then your commanding officer named Prophet, who played a much larger role in the sequels.
The sooner we are off this rock, the better.
And these guys have been sent to this tropical island off the coast of China that's come under the control of the North Korean Army, or the KPA. Initially sent in to rescue a bunch of archaeologists taken hostage, but then eventually also uncovering what these archaeologists were actually doing here. Because, as it turns out, they discovered a dormant alien species hidden away inside the island. And through both the actions of the Koreans and the US Army, they've inadvertently woken these things up, which expectedly has left them hostile and pretty pissed off. But for the first half or so of the game, you're almost entirely just taking on or avoiding the KPA, working alongside the US Marine Corps as you help to bring down radio jammers and destroy military outposts. Basically, you're just dropped into these large open maps with your nanosuit and given free reign. It's like the game will say, here's your objective and here's where you need to go, but how you do that is entirely up to you.
Target destroyed, Major.
Your suit's speed mode, for instance, helps you move a lot quicker on foot, so you can avoid using vehicles, which honestly is a good idea, because you almost instantly get shot at by the KPA as soon as you hop into one of these things. You can activate the suit's strength mode to jump higher or grab soldiers and fling them around like a sack of potatoes. Or just use a combination of your cloak and your armor to get in the best possible position and then initiate combat. Because despite this thing being a super advanced battlesuit, you still die really quickly here from gunfire, to the point that the game more or less requires you to stay out of sight and attack enemies when they least expect it. There's a decent bit of weapon customization here too, able to put different scopes and attachments on all the weapons, and this game's shotgun is also a certified hood classic. The only thing that irritates me is how your suit's energy drains really quickly, especially the cloak and when sprinting around in speed mode, which just means you always have to find a spot to hide and let it recharge. Also, there's moments when you're attacked by a chopper or a tank, the former of which is borderline omniscient and can follow you everywhere. And if you don't have a rocket launcher or something to shoot these things out of the sky, well, then you're more or less completely fucked, because it's like they've got aimbot or something and can easily see you through even dense trees and grass. Still though, the first half or so of the game is just insanely good fun, and every time I replay through this, I find something new that I enjoy about it. This playthrough, for instance, I decided to try using the dual pistols a bit more, running up behind people with these things and popping them in their head before then ducking off back into the shadows. And even just experimenting with new routes across the map or taking on an objective from a different angle made the whole thing a lot more engaging to replay. But then you get to the second half of the campaign, which, again like another one of Crytek's games, Far Cry, introduces an entirely new enemy and then completely changes the way you play. In Far Cry it was the Trigens, which were these mutated monkey things, and now in Crysis it's the Ceph, that ancient alien race that have been on Earth for a million years who have been lying dormant underneath the island. And then much like Far Cry, all of the subtlety and the stealth aspects completely go out the window, with the last few hours more or less being on rails, having you engage in frequent combat with these new enemy types which you most often can't even avoid, with there being a sequence where you're on a machine gun turret and then another one later on flying through a very linear series of valleys in a VTOL. All of which really kind of sucks in comparison, taking away the experimentation aspect and really just making it a bog standard shooter, where you're just shooting the same looking squid alien things over and over. Though I do think some of these initial sequences when the shits hit the fan are quite cool. Like that whole zero gravity journey you get through the Ceph core is just incredible. And then when you get back outside again, all of the surrounding areas are now covered in snow, which looks awesome. But yeah, dog, like there's a noticeable shift in the gameplay from this point on, and it is a far cry, no pun intended, from just how good that first half is. It's actually part of why I've always preferred Crysis Warhead to this, because it more or less followed the same structure, but just seemed to have far better pacing. Not to mention, playing as the We've Got Jason Statham at Home character Psycho was far more entertaining. Also at the time, it was optimized a whole lot more than Crysis was, making it much easier to run. And while I could fill an entire video just talking about the sequels, I will say that these first entries I still think are the best. And if I had to recommend one of these Halo killers to play through if you held a gun to my nutsack, well then this one right here would be it.
Damn it, I never get used to that.
Of all the would-be Halo killers that came and went over the years, this Crysis, was the only one who measured up. In an insane world, it was the sanest choice. Which finally brings us on to perhaps the most infamous and crappiest Halo killer of them all, with 2008's Haze.
Now it's time to set things right.
Yeah, now we're really getting into some deep shit.
We're in deep shit now, Francis.
Oh, shit.
Developed by Free Radical Design, the same guys who worked on Time Splitters, which is easily one of the all-time best series released for the 6th generation of consoles, with Haze being their first and only game made for the 7th generation, and also the last game they'd ever work on before being bought out by Crytek, right around the same time that this thing happened to underperform.
You motherfucking apes! You're meat!
Haze was also famously endorsed by Jonathan Davis from Korn, with Jonathan contributing one of the most cringiest quotes of all time, where he said something along the lines of gaming being a religion and Haze being the shit.
I overdosed. That's all. You can OD on it.
Anyway, the premise for this one was again at least kind of interesting. The story takes place in the year 2048, where a mega corporation named Mantle Industries basically controls every major facet of life, having a hand primarily in the military and pharmaceutical sectors.
Go suck some balls, skin coat.
And their big claim to fame is a so-called performance-enhancing drug called Nectar, which they give to their soldiers during combat to give them the edge.
Sure is better than coffee and a slap in the face.
You're playing as one of these soldiers, a guy named Shane Carpenter, sent to the jungles of South America to bring down a rebel faction known as the Hand, with your squad being comprised of a few very clearly psychotic dudes named Pesci, Duval, and Watchstrap. Yeah, because he's skinny, like a watch strap. Get it?
They say that because I'm skinny, see? Like a watch strap, sir.
Yeah, no, I don't get it either. You're given the option to dose yourself up with nectar during these opening missions, which not only gives you increased speed, but also highlights enemies, making it easier to spot them off in the jungle. The premise of taking performance-enhancing drugs is actually something that plenty of soldiers in the military have been well documented as doing. During the Vietnam War, for instance, the US military basically issued out speed to soldiers to keep them awake on long patrols. But even as far back as the Second World War, there's evidence of the soldiers taking methamphetamines to help them with fatigue. Speaking of Vietnam, there's even a few more similarities here too, with Mantle being this technologically advanced military force, dominating the battlefield with air superiority and fighting these guerrilla soldiers hiding off in the jungle. So the premise of these soldiers doping themselves up on meth isn't that far outside the realms of possibility. It is introduced in a pretty interesting way too, with all your squad members clearly being blitzed out of their brains and acting super twitchy, with high dosages of this nectar obviously flowing through their veins. And early on, it also makes for an interesting gimmick. In fact, if you make kills while the drug's active, it even boosts its duration, giving you a little spike and pumping the dosage up, which ironically makes you want to kill things faster, trying to chase that constant dopamine hit from murdering rebels and keeping the drug flowing through your system. There's even a section early on here that's like its own silent cartographer from Halo, dropping a buggy off on the beach and letting you drive this thing inland with a bunch of other soldiers to deal with enemies, even though these driving controls absolutely suck. But either way though, this is an interesting opening to a game and a pretty cool mechanic. So yeah, what a brilliant idea it was to just remove it like an hour after that and never bring it back. Yeah, because as it should be painfully obvious to anyone, Mantle aren't the good guys here. And this drug is actually being used to control the people who take it. Boosh! There's even some pretty gnarly sequences early on here where Carpenter's dosage messes up and he has these brief moments of clarity, able to see the world for what it truly is. And then not too long after that, lo and behold, your so-called allies show their true colors. Which is something that really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, considering it's super clear from the get-go that these guys are a few cans short of a six-pack. Especially with your commanding officer Duval, who is a comically over-the-top villain from very early on. You know how in like Deus Ex, when you found out that UNATCO were the bad guys, how it was a bit of a shock? Considering you never really had any inclinations that they were up to no good. Here though, when it's revealed that Mantle's whole humanitarian agenda is all a bit of a farce, it's like, yeah, no shit. Just an animal! It's like watching Jack Nicholson in The Shining and then trying to be surprised when he picks up an axe and starts hunting his family down.
Here's Johnny!
Anyway, from this point on, you basically end up getting rescued by a guy named Marino, who's the leader of these rebels, and he's the one who tells you the true story.
Remember your promise to Marino!
All of which is just so unexciting, with riveting cinematics like this where you can't even see a thing. Listen to Marino talk while you're stuck in this cold turkey-induced stupor.
We don't fully understand it.
Or this one where you just stare at the side of the guy's head for like 5 minutes while he drags you along and dumps out exposition.
You let someone sell you on their morality. But the moral battle is inside.
Well, how about this one where you're just sitting in a chopper staring at nothing for another 5 or so minutes?
Where exactly are we going?
There's a distress signal coming from somewhere. The camp I'll meet you.
Worse than that though is how from this point on, the shooting really is just bog standard stuff. And without that nectar mechanic, it's just your standard run-of-the-mill FPS. You're now fighting back against all the Mantle soldiers, but mechanically they more or less behave exactly the same as the rebels did. And despite there being half a dozen different weapons, that same assault rifle you used earlier on is still by far the best choice. I mean, there's a couple of times when you might need to use a sniper rifle or bust out the shotgun because you get bored, but otherwise you can beat the entire thing with that assault rifle without ever needing to change it. Instead of injecting nectar, you've now got the amazing ability to play dead. Yeah, when your health gets low enough, you can press L2 and Carpenter just drops to the ground and plays possum. Before then simply hopping up again when the enemies leave you alone as if nothing's ever happened.
Promesa!
Which honestly might be the most bitch-ass pussy move in any video game I've ever played.
You're a bitch!
You calling me a fag?
You can also put down grenade traps in the ground, which is hilarious by the way. Watching the guy somehow plant one of these things into solid matter like metal or concrete as if it's made out of sand. Oh yeah, now instead of driving buggies around, you drive a quad bike, which amazingly handles even worse. I do find it funny too how they give all the enemies individual names as if it's supposed to make you feel guilty for killing them or something. Like Clive Palmer, for instance. Wait a second, Clive Palmer? Yeah, that's a reference my non-Australian viewers aren't going to get.
Why don't you just keep quiet and let me finish what I'm saying? Every now and then. Come on, we'll have a fight if you want to.
Overall though, after that early plot twist, it just never really offers up anything all that interesting or fun. You got a turret sequence at one point on a chopper, which just feels like you're shooting out hot farts. And everything else just feels so boring and half-assed. Like this bit, for instance, when you're firing a 50 cal machine gun and the ammo belt isn't even moving.
Come on, man.
And again, like compare all of this to what Bungie was doing with Halo 3 on the Xbox 360 barely 6 months earlier. Overall, Haze was a critical and commercial failure, and it more or less killed off the entire studio, with Free Radical being bought out by Crytek after this and eventually working on the Crysis series. Either way though, yet again far from being a Halo killer, and about all this thing killed was your chance at ever having a fun time if you were dumb enough to spend money on it and play it.
Remember your promise to Marino!
I'm also aware that there's a whole bunch of other titles that I probably could have brought up in this video. I mean, I remember when people used to describe other games like Red Faction 2, Time Splitters Future Perfect, and even that Turok reboot as being supposed Halo killers. But if I did talk about every single instance here, well, we'd all be sitting here listening to me drone on until we started to bleed from our assholes. And anyway, I'd wager the few that I've mentioned in this video are the ones that most people know about anyway.
You bald fuck!
And ultimately the real Halo killer was actually Halo and Bungie themselves. I mean, there was a pretty steep decline in popularity with Halo 5, and then later on as well when Halo Infinite came out, that also divided the community a fair bit too. But those earlier entries on the Xbox and the Xbox 360 still really do stack up. And problems aside, it's kind of remarkable how well the gameplay stood the test of time. I mean, I highly doubt that people are going to be saying similar things about Killzone or Haze 20 years later, let's just put it that way. Either way though, that brings us to the end of the video. And if there's any other games you think I missed out on or want to comment on, well then make sure to let me know below. Thanks for watching.
Lock onto his position.